So this is Love, chapter 22. Blood rushed to her head as Cinderella ducked behind one of the ballroom's towering flower arrangements. Only after the count of 3 did she dare glance back at her stepmother and stepsisters. Good, they hadn't seen her. Catching her breath, she edged along the table and searched the area for Louisa. She did say she'd be by the food, didn't she? Thought Cinderella, stepping back for a better view of the buffet. Her heel landed hard on someone's shoe. She spun around, horrified, as the stranger let out a quiet gasp of pain. "Oh, pardon me," she exclaimed. "I'm so sorry." The stranger's mask slipped off, and Cinderella's knees dipped instinctively into a crouch, her fingers reaching out to catch it before it fell. The string hooked over her thumb, and in triumph she held out the mask to the stranger. "Here," she began. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked up. It was the prince. He had changed his clothing in an apparent attempt to go incognito, doffing the ivory jacket with gold epaulets for a simple blue coat with bronze buttons. But she would have recognized that face in any outfit. "Thank you kindly," said Charles, also half crouched. He started to rise to take the mask from her, but she was so startled to see him that she dropped it, and this time it fell to the ground. Her hand leapt to her mouth. "I'm sorry," she uttered quickly. "That was clumsy of me." Thankfully, the prince laughed. "I'll get it. It seems to have a mind of its own." Prince Charles picked up his mask and pressed it against his face, quickly tying the string behind his head. Then, as he rose, he finally looked up into her eyes, and he let out a quiet gasp. "It's you!" Her heart skipped a beat. What could she say? What could she do? Her legs were frozen in their spot, and if not for the table behind her, she was afraid she would have stumbled over her own 2 feet. "It's you," Prince Charles repeated in wonderment, his expression softening. He cleared his throat, a distinct rush of red coloring his ears as he realized he was staring at her. When he spoke again, his voice grew even gentler. "I thought I recognized your voice. I hoped I would see you again." Cinderella could have sworn the room was floating and she with it. The glowing chandeliers swam around her, their lights blinking like stars. He hadn't forgotten her. He recognized her, and moreover, he seemed happy to see her. Her lips parted. He was waiting for her to respond, but what could she possibly say? How could she explain why she'd left the other night and why he hadn't been able to find her? "He hasn't asked you for an explanation," she chided herself. "Hello," she said, hoping he wouldn't hear how her heart hammered. The simple greeting instantly made his face brighten, and she wondered whether he could have possibly worried the same, that she had forgotten him. "Hello," returned the prince. Before he could say any more, a server appeared with a tray of fresh glasses. Charles gestured at it, and as he offered her a glass of water, his hand trembled slightly, the only sign that he was as nervous as she was. "Were you thirsty?" Cinderella said shyly, "No, thank you. I was just looking for someone. A friend." "A friend?" "Yes, she came to the ball with me, but I think she might have made her way to the dance floor." Charles set the glass down. "Let me accompany you there to find her, and selfishly steal a dance for myself, if I may." Yes, she wanted to say. She desperately wanted to dance with him, to talk with him, to get to know him better. And yet, the Duchess's words haunted her. "I think he's in love with the idea of her." Well, the same could be said of Cinderella, too. For what did she know of the prince? Nothing. After one kiss, you were imagining yourself his bride. It's a good thing the Grand Duke never asked you to try on the glass slipper. You would have fallen into a dream with a harsh awakening. No good could come of their meeting. She was a servant in the palace, he the only heir to the throne of Aurelius. Maybe, if she made an excuse to leave, she could run back to the servants' quarters and pretend this had never happened. Then, right as she gathered her resolve, a smile lifted Charles's warm brown eyes, and she melted. "Cat's got your tongue?" he prodded softly, "or are you looking for the prince?" His gentle teasing set her heart at ease. "Your Highness, I apologize. I didn't—" "Don't bow and don't apologize." His words carried no trace of admonishment, only relief. "You have no idea how glad I am that you're here." Rather bashfully, he extended his arm for her to take. "It seems for once the Grand Duke's done me a favor." "What do you mean?" Prince Charles gestured to the Grand Duke's direction. "He's searching for you," Cinderella murmured, stating the obvious, still not understanding. "He doesn't look happy." "See that girl behind him?" Cinderella craned her neck to look. Yes, the same young lady with the tiara she had noticed earlier. I was hiding in the corner of the ballroom, trying to dodge Ferdinand's ploys to have me dance with her. If not for this scheming, I might never have seen you again." Cinderella's blush deepened. She stared at her hand resting comfortably on the prince's arm. "It looks like they're waiting for you," she said quietly. "And I've been waiting for you," replied Charles. He gestured at her mask. "A swan. It suits you." "I didn't have any choices. It was either a swan or a peacock." The prince leaned closer, speaking softly. "Swans were my mother's favorite birds. She used to tell me that once they fall in love, they stay in love forever." A fanfare pierced the ballroom's din, and Cinderella's thoughts, announcing the Princess Marie of Lourdes. A young man dressed like the crown prince of Aurelius bowed to greet the princess, and Cinderella whirled toward the prince, blinking back her confusion. "But you're here!" The prince laughed. "Pierre was kind enough to exchange clothes with me for the night. I must say, having a loyal attendant who looks like me has come in handy." He gestured at the young man in the white mask, standing stiffly beside the king's throne as introductions were made. The princess was clearly waiting for him to ask her to dance, but Pierre stifled a yawn instead. "He's doing too good a job of impersonating me," said Charles, amused. Dozens of ladies surrounded the fake prince, and even from the outskirts of the ballroom, Cinderella could hear them crying, "Your Highness, you remember me?" "Poor Pierre." "I think he rather enjoys it," said Charles wryly. "Anyway, I'll make it up to him. For now, let's take advantage of our disguises, shall we? Would you do me the honor of a dance?" She touched her mask nervously. Hundreds of guests filled the ballroom, their faces blurred by candlelight. Cinderella scanned the crowd for her stepmother and stepsisters, but she couldn't find them. "Stop worrying," she told herself. "Enjoy the moment." "You aren't still worried that you've forgotten how to dance, are you?" Charles smiled. "I know for a fact you haven't." Cinderella blushed, surprised he had remembered their conversation from the first ball. Still, the joke relaxed her, and she smiled back at him. "No, I'm not." Then she took his arm, letting a whirlwind of excitement sweep over her as they began to dance. Was she imagining it, or had the music suddenly gotten more lush and romantic? The violin seemed to swoon with her every step, or maybe she was simply happy. Happy to have found Charles again, to have the second chance with him. She wanted to get to know him. It had become apparent that she hardly knew anything about him other than what everyone knew about the prince. That every morning he rode his horse across the palace grounds, that he had been close to his mother, that he didn't enjoy attending royal balls. But where to start? Their conversation now certainly wasn't stilted, but she was forcing herself to be polite and on her best behavior. Was it because he was the prince and she couldn't help being more nervous and thus more ceremonious than before? "What's on your mind?" He sounded tentative, as if he were worried she'd run off again. She smiled shyly at him, becoming all too aware of how her heart skipped when their eyes met. It was like they were meeting for the first time. The night could stretch as long as it needed to this time. Cinderella did not have to be back by midnight. She had no magic spell to worry about, and knowing her stepmother and stepsisters, they were too busy fawning over and following the impostor prince. And yet, there were hundreds of people in the ballroom. The music swam in their ears, the murmurs of other dancing couples buzzing. Over the prince's shoulder, she finally spied Louisa waving at her from the edge of the floor. Her friend had found her own dance partner, and she winked at Cinderella, mouthing, "Who is he?" Flustered, Cinderella pretended not to understand, and she turned to the prince. Could we talk through the garden, or could we walk through the gardens again?" she asked. "It was lovely the last time." "I rather enjoyed the walk myself," said the prince. "It'll be good to get away from here. It's hard to talk over the music." Soon the ballroom glittered behind them, a silvery dome beyond a labyrinth of rose-studded bushes, leafy hedges, and marble fountains. A cool breeze tickled the back of Cinderella's neck, gently rattling the green beads. "My mother would really love it out here," she sighed. "Do you still help her tend her garden?" "No, she passed away years ago." "I lost mine at a young age, too," said Charles. He removed his mask, slipping it into his coat pocket. "I remember," Cinderella said softly. Though everyone had loved the gentle queen, and no one more than the prince, their mothers had died the same year, and Cinderella recalled wondering if everyone in the town was wearing black to mourn her mamma. "My father used to tell me that my mother was in heaven with the queen. He had a feeling they'd become friends, and they would watch over each other. That helped a little, to think that she was in a good place." "Were you very lonely without your mother?" "Yes," Cinderella admitted. "We did everything together when she was alive. She'd take me out to the gardens to play on our swing. She would name every bird in the sky and paint them too. We were supposed to travel Aurelius together and collect flowers from every city, then paint them once we returned home. She swallowed at the memory, one she had long forgotten until now. Papa used to tease us for always being lost in our imaginations together. I still have a bad habit of falling into my daydreams. Before he could ask her more, she said, "Were you lonely?" "Yes, but you wouldn't have thought so if you'd been there. I was always surrounded by people, tutors, advisors, everyone sought to shape how I thought because I'll be the future king. There was no one I could really talk to," Cinderella finished for him. Charles smiled. "Exactly. I understand better than you know." Shadows flickered across the manicured bushes, and a chill swept over Cinderella. What was that? I don't know. Creeping up toward the bushes, the prince surveyed the area. He grimaced. The Grand Duke again, I'd wager. He must have talked to Pierre and gotten suspicious. He stood. Let's get away from here. Why don't I show you more of the grounds? Cinderella nodded. I'd like that. Little by little, her nervousness faded, and she laughed when the prince told her how he used to run into the garden when he was a little boy, chased after by his tutors. I loathed my history lessons, he confessed. All the tutors always trying to impress upon me that I was related to these great kings, all of them with the same names, always a variation of George, Louis, Charles, and George again. At least it made my exams easier. The prince chuckled. I must be boring you. You're not, she assured him, though history was my favorite. Her father had hired tutors for her, but soon after he had died, her stepmother had put an end to her education. Sometimes when he had to dust the library, she'd pore through the books on the shelves when no one was looking. Her stepmother had sold off the valuable ones long ago, but Lady Tremaine recognized that books looked impressive to the few guests they had in their house, so she'd kept them as decoration, at least until she caught Cinderella reading them. My father traveled often when he was alive, Cinderella explained. And he used to bring me curios from all over the world and tell me their histories. I loved it. Then maybe you'll appreciate this, Charles replied as he directed her through the endless maze of marble stairs and pruned hedges. They soon found themselves before a glorious fountain of angels, illuminated by a constellation of silver lanterns and surrounded by a coronet of swans, with wreaths of ivy over their elegant necks. Water tingled steadily from the sides, like soft percussion against the wind's song. This fountain was commissioned by my great grandfather, said Prince Charles. Aurelius had just ended a 20-year-long war with its neighbors, and he had this fountain made to celebrate peace, but also to remind us of the bitter costs of war. Cinderella brushed her fingertips against the water, its gentle ripples tickling her skin, like the fountain in the city center. My father used to take me there when I was young. She folded her hand over her lap. I haven't been back there in many years. I'll take you one day, though I have to confess, I don't get a chance to visit the center of the city much. It is not easy to go around without being recognized. But you have Pierre, Cinderella joked. Pierre can only fool so many. Unfortunately, he doesn't have much luck with my father or the Grand Duke. He gently guided her away from the fountain. There's something else I want to show you. They walked through the gardens, the lilting music from the ballrooms growing softer and farther away. Whenever he thought she wasn't looking, he stole a glimpse of her. His lips parted. It's been a long time since I could talk to anyone this way, he confessed, without feeling like I was different. What about at the Royal University? As soon as the question left her lips, Cinderella blushed, realizing she'd revealed how much she'd asked about him. I mean, I heard that you've been studying away from the palace for several years. A grin widened on Charles's face, his eyes brightening so much Cinderella swore they shone. He took a deep breath. Even when I was a child, I never had many friends at school. All the boys were ordered not to offend me and to always agree with what I said. I used to beg my father to send me abroad and give me a different name, but he always refused. He didn't understand that I simply wanted to fit in. When I arrived at the university, I tried enrolling under a false name, but it was no use. I could have said my name was Peter the Pauper, and everyone would still have known who I was. I could have never set foot in the classroom or opened one of the textbooks and still have passed every course with honors. So you made no friends? I had a few, he said, but even then, we weren't close. His gaze met hers, And there was such tenderness in his warm brown eyes that Cinderella wished time would stop so she could memorize the way he was looking at her. I don't feel that way with you. I feel like I've been looking for you my entire life. His confession sang in Cinderella's ears, the intensity of his words arresting her in her place. I know the feeling, she whispered. A chime punctuated the end of her words, and she instinctively looked up at the clock tower. It was midnight. She lurched, giving in to a momentary flare of panic before remembering that time didn't matter. She didn't have a magical curfew, no coach that would turn into a pumpkin, no horses that would turn back into mice, and no glittering ball gown that would turn into rags at the stroke of 12. She could stay out all night if she wished. Finally, they arrived at the end of the garden, and not far from the entrance of the palace, a glistening glass box atop a marble pedestal awaited. This is what I wanted to show you, Charles said, unlocking the box and lifting her lost glass slipper. I believe this belongs to you. Cinderella held the shoe close, treasuring it. I wanted to bring the other slipper to the Duke when he was searching for me, but it shattered, and I worried. I worried I'd lost the only keepsake I had on the most wonderful night of my life in years. I thought I'd never see it again. I thought I'd never see you again. You'll never have to worry about finding me ever again, I promise. Charles gestured to the slipper, then at a nearby bench. May I? With a shy nod, Cinderella returned the slipper to him. A soft breeze swept past her mask, and she lifted it, letting the cool wind temper the heat in her cheeks. Neither of them had made a move toward the bench, and Cinderella, ignoring the sudden swoop in her stomach as she realized Charles was staring tenderly at her, sprang into her toes and kissed his cheek. When she let him go, the prince rocked back on his heels dazedly, clutching the glass slipper against him as if he feared he'd drop it. What was that for? Thank you, replied Cinderella, smiling at the confused but happy looking prince, for reminding me that not all miracles have to end at midnight. I'll explain. Charles drew her close, and her voice drifted. I'll explain later. As he bent forward to kiss her, trees rustled, and the click clack of heeled shoes stomped nearby. Cinderella lifted her head, distracted by the sound. Voices in the near distance rose above the ripple of fountain water in strident tones. There she is! Anastasia, Drizella, follow me. Cinderella immediately lurched, untangling herself from Charles's embrace. Her vision reeled, the moon became watery, the hedges of a haze of green. Panicking, she twisted away from the prince, but his fingers were laced with hers so gently she could have pulled hers away. But she didn't just yet. What is it? He asked. What's the matter? What's the matter? The familiar words echoed inside her. It was the question he had asked before she'd fled from the last ball. She faltered, not knowing what to say, not knowing how to explain. Charles bent to retrieve her mask, which she must have dropped when he kissed her. He held it out to her in both hands, but when still she wavered, confusion knit itself in the prince's eyebrows. Confusion and hurt. Hurry, girls, Lady Tremaine's voice cut through the garden. Remorse burned in her throat. The thought of hurting him again tore at her. But she couldn't risk an encounter with her stepmother. She wanted to tell him who she was. She'd meant to. But she'd thought that they would have more time. Now she recognized her error, and it was too late. I'm sorry, but I have to go. Wait, please, Charles held out the mask to her. I don't know your name. It's Your Highness. At the sound of her stepsister's shrill call, Cinderella panicked and drew away her hand from the prince. The mask slid from her fingers, falling into the pond beneath the bridge. And for the second time, before he could stop her, she rushed down the stairs.